It started with a sound that Marcus knew all too well, the dull crunch of tires over gravel in his own driveway. He had been sitting at his kitchen table, coffee still warm, when the noise reached him. He glanced out the window, and there it was again, her car. The same white SUV, shiny, spotless, parked like it owned the space. It wasn't the first time. In fact, by now, it had become a routine. Her name was Karen, though, as Marcus would later reflect, the name seemed almost too perfect for the way she carried herself. She lived 3 houses down, and yet, somehow, she found endless reasons to use his driveway as if it were her private lot. Sometimes it was just for a minute while she dropped something off. Other times, she would vanish for hours, leaving Marcus trapped, his own car hemmed in by hers. At first, Marcus had tried to reason with her. "Hey, I know space is tight on the street," he had said gently, the first time he caught her in the act, "but this is my property. I need my driveway clear." She had smiled tight, patronizing. "Oh, I'll only be a second," she had said, waving him off as if he were making a fuss over nothing. That second had stretched into an afternoon. Weeks turned into months, and every conversation followed the same exhausting pattern. Marcus would explain. Karen would nod. Then the next day, her car would be back again, gleaming under the afternoon sun like a permanent fixture in front of his home. It was the kind of disrespect that didn't just inconvenience, it gnawed. It was the casual, relentless reminder that some people still believed they could plant themselves wherever they pleased, without consequence, especially if the person they were imposing on didn't look like them. Marcus wasn't just any man. He was patient, measured, the kind of neighbor who waved at the mailman and cleared snow from the sidewalk for the older couple across the street. He had grown up in this town, bought his house with his own hard-earned money, and spent years maintaining it. His driveway wasn't just a strip of concrete, it was a small piece of hard-won stability. To have it constantly invaded wasn't just inconvenient. It was insulting. One afternoon, after another long day at work, Marcus came home to find Karen's SUV parked at an angle so sloppy it spilled halfway onto his lawn. He took a breath, walked over, and knocked on her door. She opened it with the air of someone being disturbed in the middle of something far more important than his concerns. "Karen," he said evenly, "we've talked about this. You can't keep parking in my driveway." Her smile was slow, condescending. "Marcus," she replied, dragging his name out like a lecture, "it's just a driveway. I don't see why you're making this a big deal. I've got deliveries, I've got people stopping by, it's not hurting anyone." Not hurting anyone. The words lodged in his mind. It was the same casual dismissal that Marcus had heard too many times before in too many different ways. The implication was clear: her needs, her convenience, were worth more than his rights, his space, his dignity. By now, Marcus had started to notice the glances from other neighbors, how they'd watch the exchanges from behind curtains or across the street. Some seemed sympathetic. Others seemed entertained, as though waiting to see whether Marcus would cause a scene. He knew that dynamic well, too. If he raised his voice, if he let the frustration boil over, the story would twist. He'd be the angry one, and she'd be the innocent neighbor just trying to go about her day. So he kept his tone calm, even when she smirked, even when she brushed past him as though the conversation were over. He would not give her the satisfaction of turning this into a stereotype. But inside, the decision was beginning to form. 2 weeks later, the breaking point came. Marcus had an early morning meeting across town, one of those opportunities that didn't come often, the kind that could change the trajectory of his work. He dressed, grabbed his keys, stepped outside, and froze. The SUV was there again, blocking him in. This time, Marcus didn't knock on her door. He didn't call. He didn't leave a note. Instead, he pulled out his phone, called a local towing service, and in under 30 minutes, the white SUV was hooked and rolling down the street. Karen came storming into his yard less than an hour later, voice raised, cheeks flushed. "How dare you have my car towed? Do you know how much that costs?" Marcus looked at her, unflinching. "Yes," he said simply. "Now you know how much my time costs." For a moment, she looked stunned, as though the reality of consequences had never truly crossed her mind. She muttered something under her breath and stomped away, and for the first time in months, Marcus's driveway was empty. But the peace didn't last. The very next week, the SUV was back, planted in the driveway like it had never left. This time, it almost felt deliberate, a test, a dare, a silent message that she could not be stopped. Marcus didn't hesitate. He made the same call, watched the same truck haul her car away, and when she returned, raging and sputtering, he didn't say a word. He just looked at her with the quiet certainty of someone who had decided he was done being disrespected. Word spread quickly. Neighbors whispered. Some clapped him on the back in passing, quietly approving. Others shook their heads, muttering about drama in the neighborhood. But Marcus knew one thing for certain: Karen would think twice before pulling into his driveway again. What made the story travel far beyond his block wasn't just the petty audacity of parking in someone else's space, it was what it represented. It was the small, everyday ways people try to take what isn't theirs, assuming they'll never be challenged. It was the belief that some boundaries don't have to be respected if the person on the other side isn't important enough in their eyes. Marcus hadn't just reclaimed his driveway. He had reclaimed the principle that underpinned it, that his space, his property, his dignity were not up for casual theft. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that sometimes, justice is as simple as making sure the rules apply equally to everyone, no matter who they are. For the next few days, Marcus noticed something he hadn't felt in months: peace. He could come home from work and not worry about some entitled stranger's car sitting in his driveway like it belonged there. He could walk up to his front door without having to squeeze past bumpers or feel the silent accusation of Karen's glare. But deep down, he knew it was temporary. People like Karen didn't back down easily. They didn't reflect on their actions and apologize. They found ways to justify them, twisting the truth until they were the victim. And sure enough, that Sunday afternoon, the storm returned. Marcus was in his backyard tending to the small vegetable garden his late father had helped him plant years ago when he heard it, the familiar rumble of a silver SUV engine pulling up out front. His jaw clenched. He walked around the side of the house, and there she was, pulling into his driveway like nothing had happened. No hesitation. No shame. It was as if the tow truck incident had never happened. She didn't look at him as she got out, didn't acknowledge him at all. Instead, she popped the trunk and began unloading grocery bags, balancing them awkwardly as she made her way across his property toward her house next door. "Karen," Marcus called out, his voice firm. "We've already been through this." She didn't even glance at him, just said, "Don't start today, Marcus. I'm not in the mood." The words were casual, but the tone dismissive, dripping with the kind of superiority that says your boundaries don't matter, made his blood boil. He reminded her, as calmly as he could, that this was his driveway, his private property, and she had no right to use it. She smirked without turning around and replied, "It's just for a little while." Don't be so dramatic. That single sentence said it all. To her, he wasn't a neighbor with rights and dignity. He was just an obstacle, something to work around. Marcus didn't argue further. He didn't need to. He simply walked back inside, pulled out his phone, and called the tow company again. By the time he stepped back outside, the driver was already pulling up. Karen's groceries were still sitting on her kitchen counter when she heard the sound of chains clanking and saw her car being hooked up for the second time in 2 weeks. This time, she ran out screaming. "You can't do this again. This is harassment." She yelled, waving her arms as if she could physically stop the process. The tow driver, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, just shook his head. "Ma'am, this is private property. You're trespassing. I've got my orders." Marcus stood silently, watching her sputter and rage, every word echoing years of entitlement. She tried to spin it in front of the tow driver. "He's just doing this because I'm white," she spat. The driver stopped for a moment, glanced at Marcus, then back at her. "Lady, I don't care if you're purple. You can't park where you're not supposed to. Now step back." The car was gone within minutes, her voice fading into the distance as the truck rolled away. After that, Karen took a different approach. She didn't park in his driveway anymore, at least, not for the next few weeks. But she found other ways to remind Marcus that she didn't respect him. She would stand at the edge of her yard and stare at him for long stretches of time, as if daring him to react. She'd file petty complaints with the HOA about his lawn, his garbage cans, even the paint color of his shutters. Each notice he received was a thinly veiled attempt to exert control. To remind him that in her mind, people like her were the gatekeepers of the neighborhood. Marcus could have fought her in every one of those little battles, but he chose instead to keep meticulous records. Every incident was documented: photos, videos, timestamps. He knew the value of evidence, especially when dealing with someone who had no problem lying to get her way. And sure enough, she overplayed her hand. One crisp morning, Marcus woke to find a bright orange sticker on his door, a violation notice claiming his fence was in disrepair. The irony was almost laughable. The fence in question wasn't even his. It was the shared divider between their properties, and it was Karen's side that was broken. But the HOA letter threatened fines if it wasn't addressed immediately. That was the moment Marcus decided he wasn't going to just defend himself anymore. He was going to end this. He took all the documentation he'd gathered. Photos of her parking in his driveway, videos of her ignoring his requests, records of every false complaint, and filed a formal complaint of harassment and discrimination with the HOA board. He didn't just tell his side, he showed them the truth. He also submitted a copy to the county's mediation office, ensuring there was an official record outside the HOA's control. The board meeting that followed was one for the books. Karen showed up, still convinced she could talk her way out of anything. She painted herself as the victim, claiming Marcus was aggressive and unwelcoming. But when Marcus calmly began to present his evidence, photo after photo, video after video, the room grew silent. Every smirk on her face from those driveway encounters was now frozen in high definition, undeniable. When the final video played, the one of her dismissing him with "Don't be so dramatic" while standing in his driveway, the decision was swift. The HOA fined her heavily for repeated violations and issued a formal warning that any further harassment would result in legal action. More importantly, they gave Marcus written authorization to have her car towed without warning if it ever appeared in his driveway again. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it meant something deeper. It was a reminder that dignity isn't granted by those who try to take it, it's claimed by standing your ground, even when the battle feels exhausting. In the weeks that followed, the glares stopped. The petty complaints stopped. Karen's presence became quieter, almost as if she'd finally understood that her behavior wouldn't go unchecked anymore. Marcus went back to his garden, his home, his peace, knowing he had faced down the kind of disrespect that has, for too long, been aimed at black men who dare to assert their boundaries. And while the world might not know the full weight of what that victory meant, Marcus knew. His driveway was more than concrete. It was a line in the sand. And he had made it clear no one was going to cross it again.